Oh, wow. I've never done
we're on
live
this.
streaming. Look at that. All right.
The rest of the world.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you all for coming. This is really incredible to see so many faces I haven't seen in 10, 20, 30 years, really. So thank you so much for coming. So for those who I don't know, my name's Alison Relyea, Alison Cupp Relyea. That was, most people know me by Cupp. That's what everybody called me for a long time. So I put it in the byline. And this is my first published book. It's an essay collection called Soundtrack. I was a teacher for a long time, elementary school teacher, and I have a master's in education in museum education, and I work, I actually just stopped working because I want to focus more on writing, but for the last 6 years I've worked at the local historical society in my town. And so one little piece of inspiration for this is that I had a really hard time finding sort of like first versions of history from other times, like the 1918 influenza pandemic and other things like that. And so my work and my writing and everything kind of ties together. And I'm thrilled to be here with one of my really long-term, dear friends. Drew and I met in 6th grade at General Wayne Middle School. Joe, I think we went to elementary school together. So Joe and Barb I've known the longest. Joe Presley.
Oh, I know your sister.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She was in my son Douglas's class.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So Barb I probably met first. I think I was 2.
Yeah.
And then Joe we would have met like in 1st grade or something like that. Yeah.
Where'd you guys go to elementary school?
We went to Katie Mark.
Katie Mark.
Yeah.
That's
This
right.
is all in
Is it
Pennsylvania
Sugartown?
for those. Yes, this is it. Yeah, exactly. So Drew was a Sugartown elementary school person. So we met in 6th grade. But so Drew and I go way back to 6th grade. And then we went into different directions and ended up at college together. And we've just been friends forever. And
Really security blankets at college.
Exactly. We just kind of show up for each other. And it was a really special thing on a pretty big college campus to have someone there who I knew
Like
so
family.
well. Yeah, who was like family. So all these years since we graduated in the previous century in 1998, all of these over the last 26 years, anytime that I can make a trip out to California and come to LA, I get to visit Drew and Andrea and now Catalina and Drew's wonderful parents. And so I love LA. I love California. So I was thrilled to be invited to speak here at Zibby's Books. And a little more about Drew. He's an entrepreneur, world traveler, one of the best photographers I know, and also loves music like I do. And so a lot of our memories from growing up are around music. And so I just thought it was a perfect fit to sit and chat. So we'll get started.
Yeah, one of my first questions was, when did you fall in love with music? I mean, I know that you've always loved it, but when did you know that you were, a lover of music?
Hi, Pam, Frank, oh my gosh. 2 seats right there for you. Oh, this is so cool. Thank you guys for coming. Oh my gosh, it's so good to see you. So good to see you, Frank. Good to see you. Thank you. So Drew just asked me the first question, which was, when did I fall in love with music? The earliest sort of memories that I have of just feeling so connected to music are probably in middle school, which is probably true for a lot of people. I remember being on those buses to sports events and things like that, and just listening to the Sony Walkman and sharing tapes with my best friends, and just really, loving music and sort of starting to see the world through music and forming memories that way. For better or worse, my first concert was New Kids on the Block with Jesse.
Better.
with Jesse Petrisco. But I wasn't really a New Kids fan. I was more of a New Order, and I got really into The Cure and New Order and the Britpop in middle school because my brother is he's 6 years older than I am, and just a huge. He was my musical influence, so that was sort of and my sister, So it was fun to have older siblings when it came to music because I did feel a little bit more like on the cutting edge than maybe the new kids. Yeah. The New Kids on the Block. So middle school.
I remember because I was only allowed to listen to classical music growing up. When my neighbor asked me if I knew who the Beatles were, and I was like, who? So I had to sneak away to friends to get my original music exposure. Besides Bach and Beethoven, Mozart.
You're actually yes, you are very fortunate. I didn't have that kind of musical education. I mean, other than my dad insisting that every single one of us play the trumpet, which so I'm very grateful that I learned to read music. So I'm not a musician these days at all, but I do feel like it was really great that my dad didn't insist on much. We had a very laid back household, and but that was one thing that he did tell us we all had to do, or else he still had his trumpet from when he was growing up. So it was just sort of like, we already have a trumpet, so that's what you're signing up for. I don't remember having any choice in the matter. I just remember knowing that trumpet was the instrument I had to play. So
how about writing? Writing is hard.
Mm-hmm.
I've been told that there is no such thing as good writing, only good rewriting. How did you know, or when did you know that you could actually write? Because personally, your friend calls you and says, "Hey, here's the book that I wrote," and we talked about it as you were writing it. You kind of roll your eyes like, "Yeah, sure, you're going to write a book," and then you wrote a book, and that's amazing. And for a lot of people who have ideas of writing books and have either tried and failed or can't get it across the finish line, it's such a commitment. It's such a labor of love. When did you know that you were good enough to actually do it? Because you're a really good writer.
Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh, I can.
You're a really good writer.
We get a couple more chairs here. Thank you so much, Drew. And so I loved writing in college. I studied art history. We had those writing seminars, those freshman writing seminars. I felt surprisingly well prepared when it came to writing when I went to college.
Did you do a lot of reading as a kid? Like, were you a reader?
Mm-hmm. I was a big reader. And so I always liked writing. I did find it very challenging because of the revisions, and I still find it very challenging because of the revisions. But I always wrote, and I used to keep a journal until I kind of figured it out. I think it was until I met my husband. So I guess maybe my life had a lot of drama. And then I met my husband, and it was sort of like, oh, I don't need that, that journal anymore to, flesh out all my emotions or whatever. So I stopped keeping a journal at some point, in my early professional career in my 20s. And then when I was teaching elementary school, I was teaching writing. And I loved teaching writing. And so it was right when my youngest, who's 10, when he was born, he's my third. And when he was born, I didn't go back to teaching full time in the classroom. And that's when I started focusing on writing more. I took a couple classes in New York City at the 92nd Street Y. And I just absolutely loved it. And then when I started at the Historical Society, I started by doing freelance writing. And that's so nonfiction narrative writing, but researched. So using the archives and writing stories about local history, trying to find little known stories, which was really challenging. And that I hadn't done researched writing since I was in college. So that was really fun. And so when after Ian was born, I spent a few years where I was doing some freelance writing, getting some things published. A couple essays got published in literary journals and things like that. The little newspaper in my town, the Rye Record, they're always happy to, have an emerging writer publish something. There was actually another author who has been to this bookstore, and she is about to come out with her third novel. She started with an essay collection as well. She's from Rye. Her name's Annabelle Monahan, and she wrote for our little Rye record and had a regular monthly column. And she's a big inspiration for me. So even with this, I was writing so much during the pandemic. It was, I mean, aside from listening to music and writing were my ways of just coping with the unpredictability, and finding my space, in a crowded little house. So I started, I'd been in this writing group. It was first a hiking group, and then in the winter we decided to start a writing group. And there were about 7 of us. That was we think it was 2017 that we started a writing group in Rye. And then when the pandemic hit, we added a couple more people. And we've been 10 writers strong since March of 2020. And we rarely miss a week. Like, I'm missing this Friday because I'm here. But almost every Friday we write. And we all write. We write different things. Some people write from prompts and just write sort of for the creative expression. Some of us were working on more long-term projects like this. But we all, when the pandemic hit, we went right to Zoom. So we had like the Brady Bunch screen and we'd talk and we'd catch up, and then we just turn the camera off, turn the microphone off, and write for about a half an hour. Then we would come back and share. And really, that regular writing during the pandemic, both in the group with 10 people as well as on my own, that's how this came to be. Usually I would have just one standalone essay and I'd rework it, and it would take me a long time. Like, there's one in here that's about 9/11 that I published in a literary journal separately. And that took 18 years to write, really. Like, I had it in my head for a long time. And then it was on the 18th anniversary that I started to get it all on paper. And then on the 19th anniversary, I finally got it out to a literary journal and published it. So I usually work, I guess that's all to say, I usually I work more slowly. But I had so much material and so much time and such a need to write during the couple years that I wrote this, that it just kind of all came together.
Do you remember the moment where you're like, I'm going to write a book, or I'm going to do the book, or what was the inspiration?
The very first essay.
Because there had to have been a switch.
Yeah, so the very
when was
first
it?
essay, which is about watching the Mr. Rogers movie, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, with my youngest, the Tom Hanks movie. So the very first essay, I just loved. Like, I wrote it, I was like, I love this, and I love the musical tie-in, and I was already starting to listen to a lot of music. And then I kept adding to it, and probably around May or so, in my writing group, I read the whole thing, and it was long, and they were very patient. And my friend Jamie said, she said, I think that's really 3 essays. I think you should break it up. I see, this is one distinct one, and then there's this. And she said, I love the musical references. And as soon as I got that advice and got that freedom to break the essays into smaller parts,
Sorry, there's a car blocking. Does anybody have a license plate Panda Tiger in the parking lot? A white car next door.
No, I want that license plate though.
Sorry, I'm just checking because they're all congregating out here because they're looking to see if there's somebody around here. Because it's right here.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Look for somebody who's got black and white spots.
That's so funny. So once I had that permission, not permission, but you know what I mean? Like, once I had that freedom to break it into smaller pieces, and the music theme was really emerging, then
how did you find that? How did you choose or know that you had kind of that framework to pull in the music? Because one of my favorite parts was listening to the music that you referenced, and I had forgotten about The Rose.
Oh.
And I put The Rose, I put
Not one
Bedler's
of my
Rose back
favorite
on.
songs. I was
weeping. I was like, because I remember because I used to play it on the piano,
Yeah.
and I completely forgot about that song. Like,
Yeah.
wow, it was like a treasure hunt a little bit. That it was interactive, and I was and you kind of at the end you brought it all together. You found Nick Hornby's.
Nick Hornby's.
What was the book name?
It's called.
Hype it up.
No,
No, the
not
one
High
that you
Fidelity.
found.
It's this book that is. I should
Anyway, it's a
know exactly
random
what
book
it's
that
called.
nobody knows
Yeah.
that it's not one of his more famous books, but it's similarly structured.
Yes.
So
It's
how
called
did you-
Songbook, and I think it's 35 essays or something about his favorite songs. And
talk about validating.
so I had already finished writing this.
And
I
then
had
you
sent
found
the
it.
manuscript off to 2 publishing companies, and it was this week it ended up not being very long because the one company got back to me quickly, but I was in this holding pattern. I sent the script off, was waiting to hear. I sent a copy to my grandmother because she was 102 at the time, and I was just like, I kind of want her to read this. Who knows how long she'll be around. So I sent one copy to my grandmother, emailed it off to these 2 publishing houses, and I was waiting, and that's when I found the Nick Hornby book, which was just such a funny coincidence. So there's an essay about that. That's the very last one. So the music theme, it just happened. Like the Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood has a Tracy Chapman song in it called The Promise. And it was just like, I mean, I'm sure this happened to a lot of you. We slowed down so much that you just paid attention to things in different ways. And in addition to my writing group, I had I had a journal that I did go back to journaling like I used to. So I had a journal that I was writing in every day, even if it was just a paragraph. So I would just jot down things that stood out during the day. And then the essays were really those stories that I would then come back to. I'd be out for a walk and thinking about it and pulling in memories or pulling in, people from other parts of my life. And and I could just sort of tell what things were fleeting and what things were staying with me and what I wanted to sort of go into more. And the music was just an easy way to do it. And I've been putting a lot of musical references into my work for a while, not quite as explicit, not quite as intentionally as this. But it has always been a big thing that's influenced me. So, and how I remember a lot of stories. So, yeah.
So I have 2 more questions for you, and then I don't know if you were going to read or
and then
take
I'll
questions.
read one, yeah.
So there's a saying that amateurs talk strategy and professionals talk logistics. When you want to write a book, it's like, I want to write a book, and then you write the book. For anyone who would, start from the beginning, what are the logistics that you kind of had to learn along the way to get this book in my hand right now? Like, there's got to be so much. It's not just typing it in your computer.
Yeah.
What are those logistics that you went through that you learned along the way to take it from it's on my computer to book in hand?
Yeah. I finished, I got to this point where I was sure, I just felt done. It was right around that Omicron strain. I was just like, I think I'm done. And so that's when I started to look into, how am I going to put this out there? Am I going to put one essay at a time, sort of up on, on the internet or something like that? But I didn't want to do that, because I felt like it was a good project to go through the publishing process with. And the probably most important thing I did, and the thing that then drove the project, was I reflected on what my goals were for the book, because it was the first book that I was writing, and essay collections aren't an easy sell. There's all different things in the publishing world. I felt like if I had 2 novels that I'd started before the pandemic hit. I haven't even opened the files again. They're both about 30% done. If I write a novel, the logistics and the process is going to be very different than this. I felt this was timely. I knew it was an essay collection. I wanted to be really clear about what my goals were for it, which was to do the best writing I possibly could, really work hard on the revisions, and focus on the craft and get it to a polished point where I was really, really proud of it, and not focus as much on some of the industry stuff in terms of getting an agent and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But I will approach another project very differently. But the thing that I'm so glad I did was really reflect on what those goals were. And part of it was finding that Nick Hornby book, because I know he's got a lot of really, he's got a lot of bestsellers. And then there's that book that I'd never heard of before, but that when I read it, I just devoured it. And I felt like it was sort of for me. So I was like, I want to find the readers who feel like this is for them. And it doesn't have to be, millions of people. So Mascot Books was fantastic to work with. My editor was just my sort of the project editor who helped with the bigger picture stuff. He was really great. And then the copy editor, there were so many phases. I worked first with my friend Wiley, who used to work at Simon & Schuster. So she wasn't at Mascot. This was before I sent the manuscript out. I just wanted to know from her, because she is in the industry and she's a professional editor, am I going in the right direction?
Yeah.
So it was so great to work with her. I loved that piece of it. And she was fantastic. And then I signed on with Mascot, and then we went through a couple iterations. They have a design team that does cover design, but a woman, when I thought I might self-publish it, my friend Alison Fadden, my editor, came to call her double L and me L, and it was like this, but she had already done one run through of a cover. It actually had it originally had a record on it, but then that didn't work because mixtape isn't, so I didn't have the whole title finished. But I really wanted to work with her. So that was one thing that added some logistics, but in the end, I'm so glad that I did, because I loved working with her. And I just loved the partnerships and the collaborations I found along the way. So I think I was fortunate. I had a really good first publishing experience. And I think people can have all different experiences. I would love to do it again. And I know it'll be completely different next time. But I'm very, very glad.
So that's my last question. What's next?
So I want to go back to working on the fiction.
Yeah. What's it about?
One is set in Pennsylvania, and I'm trying to figure out if it's young adult or not. One has some sort of autobiographical stuff from Malvern. And then the other one is contemporary fiction, like sort of family life, but it's not really actually all that autobiographical. I mean, it would take place in a town similar to Rye, New York, where I live now. But it's I'm hoping it's funny. It's actually it's about a woman who joins a tennis group and then and loves tennis, and then sees that tennis is like this big thing in her town, and the people are always in tennis whites and stuff, and she just gets sort of disenchanted, and it's like disenchanted with the tennis group, but she doesn't tell, she tells the tennis group that she's not in their group anymore, but she kind of pretends she joins another one, and she still goes to drop off on that morning, still in her tennis whites. I don't know exactly why, but instead she goes for walks in the woods, and she befriends this person who she never would have befriended otherwise. But in the end, there's this piece that's, or not in the end, sort of the main conflict in the novel is that she never tells her husband that, and then she has this really strong relationship with this other, and it's not romantic at all, but then there's this point at which she really should have so I'm trying to, I want to sort of get to the theme of honesty and partnership, and when is something deceitful versus just an omission. I don't know. I'm not that far into it, so I'm still playing around with it, but I'm excited about it. I like it. I like the characters, and so that's that. And then so we'll see. Who knows?
Love it.
Yeah. So I'll read one of the essays. All right. So Drew picked this one. He picked a few, and then each essay in here. I made it a track list, so it's like on a mixtape would be. So it's track 7, A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. I think I can do it without my glasses. Prior to the summer of 2020, I hadn't considered activism to be a character trait of our suburban town. Yet a week after the March for Justice, a crowd gathered again for a Pride Month celebration on the village green. Youth leaders gave inspiring speeches while young children made rainbow-themed crafts and played beneath the trees. To close the ceremony, 3 siblings performed the Indigo Girls song, Closer to Fine. This was before the Barbie movie, so like that's how on trend I was with my music. I've known every word to that song since I was 15 years old, yet hadn't fully processed the way its meaning connects to identity. While not specifically about LGBTQ plus identities, the message of young people finding themselves fit the moment. Even adults are a work in progress. The line that I always heard loudest when I was younger was, help me take my life less seriously. My mom used to, and still does, remind me to laugh and not be too hard on myself. I need that voice in my head, suggesting that questions often have more than one answer, especially now that I'm a mom of kids on the brink of adolescence. Searching for the right way is a waste of time. I thought I had outgrown the Indigo Girls, but no, I still loved this music and how it transported me to teenage memories. I remembered listening to the album Rites of Passage while lying on a rocky lake in Canada with high school friends during our last pre-college summer. They were my hosts on that lake in Canada. We looked up at the millions of stars and wondered where our lives would go from here as Galileo played in the background. Was that the Milky Way we saw? We thought so. In college, it seemed that every guy who played the guitar knew Closer to Fine, as if it were part of a top 10 list of tips for appearing deep and romantic. It always made me laugh a little, but I found myself singing along. After the Pride celebration, the Indigo Girls made their way onto my pandemic soundtrack. My daughter Eliza requested their music in the car. I like the Smith siblings version better, she proclaimed the first time she heard the original. Eliza asked if the Indigo Girls were gay. Earlier, she had asked me if there were any pictures of Sinead when she had hair and why she shaved her head. Over the months, Eliza started developing an understanding of the links between appearance, expression, and identity, and these musicians gave us a way to find answers to her questions. It also meant we got to listen to good music while we talked. The rest of the summer felt quiet, despite the country moving toward a presidential election that fall. Pandemic school drew closer and occupied the main stage of worries and political tension. The normal excitement of September was overshadowed by words like hybrid learning and protocols, and the first weeks of school were weird. There's no other way to describe it. We were all on a whole new learning curve, and the goal was to get through each day, preserving enough energy to face the next. I stayed in my little world until big moments pulled me out. For me, the first big event that fall was the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I didn't cry right away. I had a mix of emotions similar to when my grandparents died in their 90s. Sadness, along with gratitude for the full life she lived, and a curiosity to learn more. It was anticipated yet devastating, complicated in what it meant for our country. One of our biggest defenders of civil rights, the archetype of the term small but mighty, was no longer in place to uphold the laws she and others had fought so hard to establish. A few nights later, awake and alone in the middle of the night, I played one of my favorite videos on YouTube. It was the first song I listened to that brought me to tears after Justice Ginsburg's death. Patti Smith's version of Bob Dylan's A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall at the Nobel Prize in Literature ceremony. It was a formal, fancy event with an elegant audience of kings and queens, princes and princesses. Patti Smith is many things, but fancy is not one of them. A couple of minutes into the song, she faltered mid-line and paused. She apologized, tried to continue the line, faltered again, tried to pick up the next line, then stopped singing completely. Turning to the musicians behind her with a smile, her eyes to the audience, her eyes full of feeling, she said, "I'm sorry, can we start that part? Can we restart that part?" Then to the audience, "I apologize, I'm so nervous." People applauded in support, or most of them anyway. She resumed singing and made it through to the end. I'll never know what I find more beautiful, the incredible grace and vulnerability with which Patti handled that moment with the audience, or the fact that it happened against the backdrop of those lyrics. A hard rain's gonna fall. The song is a journey through the world, through the senses, and through the human psyche. A funeral song of despair, for sure, but love and beauty, too. Watching Patty in front of that audience reminded me of the petite RBG standing up for what's right in Capitol Hill, surrounded by people who don't look like her and some who likely preferred not to listen to her. She proved herself with strength, courage, conviction, humility, and humor. She showed that fitting the mold is not as important as blazing a trail. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, among the suited majority male judges and politicians in Washington, was a lot like Patty on that stage, singing gravely after asking to begin again, her long gray hair and lack of makeup conspicuous among the tuxedos and gowns and diamonds. Oh, how I wish through these last many months, these last years, that like Patti Smith, we could restart this part or that part, do it over again. I've dreamed that our country and our world had some do-overs, like a children's game of kickball where the players can't agree if the runner is safe or out. Do-over, they call, and everyone knows to go back to their previous spot. Instead, we have to carry these words, these women, and their lives forward with a vow to do better for the next generation. One of my favorite lines in A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall is, I met a young girl, she gave me a rainbow. It screams, life has all gone to shit, but there's still beauty and joy and hope. There's still a reason to keep going. I see my daughter in that line, her love of music and her love of life. The day after my midnight Nobel Prize viewing, I overheard Eliza singing Closer to Fine, and I smiled at that little sliver of legacy, a memory that only happened because, within the push and pull of politics, we'd marked a moment with music months earlier. The next day, Eliza made a plan to bring a picnic breakfast to a nearby park and watch the sunrise. I woke her up and she toasted waffles and filled a small Tupperware container with syrup. She packed forks and plates and napkins in her fabric lunch bag, and we put on our shoes and light jackets and walked out into the crisp fall air. I played music as we walked the 2 blocks to the park. Then we settled in on a bench overlooking the water and opened our breakfast. We listened to Indigo Girls and Patti Smith's cover of Bob Dylan as we ate waffles on paper plates, watching another day begin. We didn't have all the answers, and there were no do-overs. But at that moment, we were a little bit closer to fine. Now we can do quick Q&A.
Yeah, Q&A. I mean, I've got more too if anyone wants to jump in.
Yeah, you talked about your writing process, and I wonder, do you write using like handwriting and computer, and do you prefer one or the other?
I do handwrite some, and I do use the computer some, and I prefer handwriting because I do find what you'll read about when you read about the writing process, like things just flow more easily, and I don't edit that first time. I'll cross things out, but you can't backspace and overthink it too much. So in my writing group, I almost always handwrite, but then other times I will go right to the computer because it's just more efficient time-wise. So there's sort of pros and cons to both, because I'm sure there's some things that I wrote in a notebook somewhere that I've never gone back and transcribed and put into the computer, and then they're just sort of sitting in a notebook. And but I like both. But handwriting is my preference if I have the time. Yeah. Yes, Barb.
How do you do it with your kids? And I know your kids, they're not quiet.
No, they're not. They're not at all. They're very big personalities, is what my mom always very kindly says about my children. I like during, I think we all did this during the pandemic, right? Like we just learned to sort of block out what was going on. Like they weren't going off to school. So I had to find ways to just make space in the house. And that was the one thing, that was what I made space for. That and my walks were really, because I have a dog. And so like all those other dogs in those early months, that dog got miles and miles of walks. So I would go for my walks and I would write. And I am a morning person. I like to wake up early and do some reading or writing before the kids before the kids get up. So yeah. Yes.
Where is the mythical college you guys alluded to but did not name?
Oh, yeah.
High above Cayuga's
It
waters.
is. It's far above Vegas waters. It's Cornell. Yeah, yeah. And Beth, we have a bunch of Cornell alumni here. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Lots of memories there, as I'm sure you know. College is that other time that really middle school right through the end of college. I feel like that's when my musical taste was most influenced, and I think that's true for most of us. Is that decade between in there? Yes.
What do you like best about writing?
I like piecing things together. Like what I loved in this was when I would make a connection that fit back into a story. So I love, as hard as the revision process is, I also love the revision process because I think that's when those deeper connections come together. And when you just know what to get rid of also, when you just say, that's not working for me, I can drop that. Yeah, but I just loved when I would notice something, or like in that one where my daughter was then singing the song. I just love those moments and I want to get those down on paper. So yeah.
Random question, but congratulations, by the
Thank
way.
you.
Like what a wonderful accomplishment. But of all of the essays, is there one that is like your baby? Like, is there one that just kind of like when you saw it on the page, or maybe one that you struggled with? Like, is there like, you know, one that you look back and you say,
There's a couple that I struggled with like because the content was hard. So I wrote about the after George Floyd was murdered, I wrote about the March for Justice that we had in our town because it really was unlike anything I had seen in the time that I've lived there, because Rye, New York is not a very diverse town, and racially diverse. And again, the whole world was on pause. So we were all sort of like, what comes out of this? What is going to happen? So I wrote that essay kind of immediately following. And then when I went back and did revisions, I really had to rework it because I had to figure out a way to make it a personal essay and not like, I'm not the voice. Other people had a lot to say about, the Black Lives Matter movement. And I mean, there's a lot of people who can sort of make political commentary or social commentary in a more eloquent way than I can. And my purpose in that essay was really to capture my experience of it in the place where I was living. So I had to totally rework that one because the emotion was just very different from then. But the one that I would say is sort of more like my baby. There's a couple. Barb, because you're here. It's Drops of Jupiter, which I wrote about my sister's friend Laurel, and my two best friends and Chrissy's two best friends, my older sister. And that one just kind of, because it was that Midler song. So I listen to a lot of this show. If you guys don't listen to it, you might like it if you do like music. Desert Island Discs. It's BBC Radio. It's been on for I think like 82 years or something, like on the radio for 82 years, and now it's a podcast. And the hosts interview people who are well known in whatever their field is. They're not necessarily famous to us, but they have interviewed a lot of famous people. So like Lin-Manuel Miranda is just one that I remember. And so the hosts interview the guest and the person tells their life story with 8 tracks referenced throughout it. And that's when I heard that song, The Rose by Bette Midler. And I had it totally wrong because it made me think of beaches. And I was on the boardwalk and looking at the beach, and that song's not in beaches. It's that other Wind Beneath My Wings one, whatever. But I do like The Rose better than Wind Beneath My Wings. So I was actually kind of glad that was my doorway in. And then it's called Drops of Jupiter because even though my sister says there's like, 30 songs that remind her of Laurel, a lot more than Drops of Jupiter, there's this one line in Drops of Jupiter that's my best, or your best friend always sticking up for you, even when they know you're wrong. And Laurel just always stood up for us, and especially for my sister. She just couldn't have asked for two better best friends than Laurel and Alexa. And so it was really special to me to find a way to tell that story in the book. So yeah, so that one.
Did you have a teacher that inspired you?
Mrs. McGarty.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Miss Rossoff for the history piece, and Mr. Sprague for the history piece. But in terms of writing, yeah. Yeah. But in terms of the writing, it was definitely Mrs. McGarty.
Well, this was in college?
Those were high school teachers.
High school teacher.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think Mr. Sprague was 10th grade world.
Yeah.
And then Miss Rossoff was 11th grade American history. And Mrs. McGarty, I think I had in 9th or 10th grade. Yeah.
Have you had a chance to tell them that?
Yeah. Well, Mrs. McGarty and I have connected on Facebook. So we're Facebook friends now.
Miss Rossoff.
And Miss
She's
Rossoff
Dr.
and I-
Rossoff.
Miss Rossoff and I have stayed in
Yeah.
touch over the years. She was also the field hockey and lacrosse coach, and my mom ran into her at Wegmans the other day. So we're still in touch. Yes.
One thing that I find remarkable, or just something that I'm noticing or perceiving about you, Cupp, because I still think of Cupp, you as my president.
Yes.
When I lived there, I was just a bitty sophomore. There was this very erudite and grounded and wise. Like that was always something that you gave forth. And then reading that in the book, it all came right back. And I wonder, in addition to your writing, which clearly is a daily practice, do you have, and your walking too?
Mm-hmm.
I might be answering my own questions. Are these practices that keep you, it seems like you notice a lot, you're very grounded. That's something that I've always kind of appreciated about you. And is that something, I would imagine that it serves you pretty well. Is that a way you describe yourself? Like being grounded and present?
You'd have to ask my husband and my kids.
Yeah.
I feel like they might read this in 20 years and be like, that's not how I remember those 18 months at all. But I started going, walks. I mean, I do listen to the podcast. I do listen to podcasts when I go for walks, but I also go for walks with friends a lot. And anytime my sister's home, we go for a walk. Anytime I'm in Pennsylvania, I plan a walk with Kelly Bavinez, who lives there now. And I love going for walks as a way to connect with other people too. And I used to go for a lot of walks with my mom when we moved to Toronto, and I didn't really have any friends. So going for walks is like a big part of just my processing. I can tell the days when I didn't get out there to walk a few miles. And the writing it really helps me. As did listening to music. I mean, I really felt that, and it's funny, in the first essay, I kind of referenced that the music I was listening to wasn't normally if we were going to play music while Rich and I were cooking together or something before the pandemic, we'd find something we both liked and that's a nice thing to do. But during the pandemic, I didn't really care what anybody else's requests were, which is how the Sinead O'Connor came in. I was just I loved her when I was a really emotional teenager, and I just loved this strong, loud, bold woman. And for whatever reason, in those early pandemic months, that was what I wanted in my house. So the music and the writing, those are the things that, and the walking are things that I love in my everyday life. Yeah. So, any other questions?
I have one.
Yeah.
Obviously, writing a book is no small undertaking. What were the greatest obstacles that you overcame to get this to where it is now?
I guess letting go, knowing that not letting perfect get in the way of good enough. So knowing that if I reread this, there are things that I would change, or, you know, a word choice where I see it in one paragraph and then 2 paragraphs later it's the same word and things like that. So there's always things that could be fixed or made better, but at some point I had to just, and in the world we live in now, you can write and publish things for years and never have something actually go through a printing press. So, which means that you can often update or make edits to some of, depending on who controls the material. I mean, how many times we read news stories and it's like, you know, edited to, you know, this person's name was wrong or whatever, like, they get the details wrong. So with a book, I had to be okay with some mistakes in there. And I think that was a little bit, it was just a learning curve for me. And then I think, again, like going back to the goals of the project, like knowing that this was timely, I was really passionate about it, I was really proud of it, and I wanted to get it out into the world in you know, in a reasonable timeline, and then move on to another project. So that was the other thing, that because I'd never done it before, it was a little bit of a challenge to really be able to work through those logistics. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Any other questions?
Who do you like to read?
Do you have any
that's a
favorite
great
authors?
question.
that you-
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you know who you like to listen to. Like-
Yeah. In terms of essays, I love David Sedaris. I love Anne Lamott. But I don't read a lot of, I mean, I read some essay collections, but not Margaret Rankel, who writes, she writes for the New York Times. She writes nature pieces. She's just a beautiful writer, and she's from Nashville. And so she writes a lot about the South, and she just writes in this beautiful, this really incredible style. So I love her. I like Ann Patchett a lot. I was listening to Dutch House in the beginning when I was going for my walks. I was reading the actual book, and then I had to finish it for a book club or something.
That's
so then
Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
It's very
it is Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
It is very Pennsylvania. Yeah, so I like Ann Patchett, and the author I loved in high school was John Irving. I remember reading A Prayer for Owen Meany and just loving that book and loving some of his other books as well. And I just think he's such a brilliant storyteller. And so, yeah, those are some of my favorite authors.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Did you have a question?
Yeah. I was wondering, like, you mentioned that you sent the manuscript to like 2 publishers. Like, what was the process like of getting it actually published and out there?
Well, so one liked it, and the other one said, we can coach you and you might end up getting, you know, but one liked it and was very enthusiastic about it. And that was, so the same week I found the Nick Hornby book, and then I went to the Ben Folds concert with my son, because I was never a big Ben Folds fan, but all of a sudden I was, because it was in the Nick Hornby book. So this was all the week before Labor Day of 2020. Wait, let me think. 2022.
Yeah.
So it was like end of August 2022. Was when I was sending it around, and I'd already worked with my friend Wiley. So from the essays end in January 2022, and between January and August is when I was working on the first round of really deep revisions, and then I sent it off to the publishers in the end of the summer.
Oh,
Yeah.
Cool.
And I didn't, you know, there's all like Morgan works in the publishing world. Like most people would, like there's, you know, getting an agent is like the really big obstacle, but I didn't do that for this because Mascot's it's what's called a hybrid publisher. So it works a little differently than a traditional publisher. So so I sort of sidestepped some of the normal path. But I was very, and I knew that if I tried to self-publish it, it was never going to get done. I just know myself and my ability to manage those kinds of tasks, and it would still be, you know, a file on my computer somewhere. So yeah. Yes.
I'm curious if someone asks you, well, what influence did a school like Cornell have on your life, how would you answer that?
The people.
The people?
Yeah, that would be the biggest, most resounding influence that it had on my life, is that I feel like I carry those 4 years with me in everything that I do. I mean, in all the people who are here. And then the other thing, I think, because I was in arts and sciences and did have to take 2 freshman writing seminars, I think that if you go to a big university and you can take some small writing classes, that is a really important thing. I think, you know, teaching kids to write, writing is just such an important skill in everything that we do. And so I loved that even at a big school and even as a non-English major, that was part of what was expected of us, to just get us all to a standard level. So, and they were cool writing seminars. It wasn't just about writing. So like one that I took was this art history class. It was art history writing seminar. It was called The Image of the Body. And I remember it so well. I ran into he was a TA at the time, but now he's a full professor at the Guggenheim, like, you know, maybe 10 years ago. This guy, Fraser Ward, he was just such a brilliant teacher, and he was really tough on us as writers. And we watched Blade Runner. That's like was my favorite thing about it, was that I had never seen Blade Runner before, and we had to watch and study and talk about Blade Runner and the image of the body, you know, the cyborgs in that. And yeah, so they were really cool classes too. It wasn't just how to write a 5-paragraph essay. It was how to really analyze and go deep into material. So yeah, but really it's the people. Thank you. Thank you all for coming with me. I can get a picture with everybody.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. I guess.
Should we join you at the chairs?
Yeah, I mean, you guys could all. What do you think works together?
I think in front of the bookcase.
Okay, cool. Thanks.